Hey guys, so I thought I was going to talk a little bit about the CSS contribution, or I don't even know if I would call it a contribution to our community, but it's CSS Grid. This is going to solve a few of our problems. Absolutely. I look at the spec and I look at all the tutorials, and I understand, like, Rachel Andrew, who is, she's probably my favorite speaker when it comes to Grid. She has a very deep understanding, and, like, watch her videos and her talks, because she seems like she's pretty knowledgeable about this spec. And I understand the problem it's trying to solve, but I want to say right now that this is horrible. This is horrible. This is the most god-awful, horrible fucking thing. It's a testament to the inadequacy that is CSS. If you are you have named lines, you have column definitions, everything about this spec is screaming, let's make this a programmatic thing, make a programmatic API for this. Because when you are in essence writing, in all of my life, I have never ever seen anyone ever write code where you need to break down a CSS statement to a multi-line structure in order to express a very complex layout. This is so horrible. It is it's the problem that CSS, there's two major problems with CSS, and this just proves I've always argued this, and I think this proves the point. The first and foremost problem is that what CSS is doing, the original intention behind CSS was to simply allow you to do basic styling of components, but the web has grown beyond that, and we need more and more complex structures. That's why the initiatives that are trying to get us programmatic access, like the native stuff actually can, is a much better approach. Because CSS is just an abstraction of rules on top of having access to what you really want access to, which is what JavaScript is trying to. In many cases, people use JavaScript to bridge basically the limitations of CSS. Now, CSS isn't all bad. I mean, it can do some really powerful stuff, but we needed to do more than it was designed to do, and that's why we get god-awful specifications such as Grid. Because Grid is trying to take this to the next level. It's trying to express something that is, in my opinion, so complex in comparison to what CSS was originally trying to do that it's getting ridiculous. We're getting functions and all. We're this close from making CSS a programming language, and maybe that's what we should do. I don't know. I'm just saying that I don't think that it makes. Can we just stop this? Can we just agree that CSS has played its part and move to something better? Because when you're trying, when it's so obvious that you're trying to shoehorn in things into the specification because that's the way it's always worked, it just gets so messy. And to me that is, I'm not trying to be unfair to CSS Grid. I'm excited about learning it and being able to use it. I just want to say that from my perspective, the specification is horrible. And the way that you express all this complexity in the layout is horrible. It's so complex in comparison to what should be a fairly straightforward thing. That's number one. CSS was designed to be simple, and now you wanted to do all these complex things for you, and you're making it very complex. The second thing that CSS does really poorly is, when it's the next thing we're trying to solve. These are, honestly, most of the front-end initiatives that I pay attention to today, and I argue from my very, very poor understanding. I'm nowhere near as much of an expert as I would like to be. But I personally feel that the only issue in front end today, the only problem left to solve, right now, at least for when it comes to like UI interface, like interfaces and all that stuff, is it is CSS. It is in essence to be able to create a single component of a widget or something, put it into any context or in any page, and be guaranteed that it's going to look and feel and behave in the expected manner, so that you can make truly generic or reusable components that will work in any context without having to like create a shame.css file or like override global mutation, because that's the second part. That's the thing that I argue that CSS does even worse, and that's scoping things. It was never designed to really do that. And what I'm trying to get at here is that if you don't know what CSS Grid is, and go and learn it, and then try to do something a little bit fancier than a very basic like grid layout. Try to express something a little bit more fancy, and you'll very quickly see how many rules you have to build, and all these like in the talk I was just watching that triggered this entire little rant of mine. I saw they showed an example of how to get a certain type of page layout, and she herself she's basically, and this is someone who is fairly like almost an expert, I would say an expert on CSS Grid. She showed an example of how that layout could be achieved by some smart person who made it, and now she walks through how it works. When you have to go that deep to explain something in CSS, then something's wrong. It is wrong. We're trying to go for simplicity here, people. We're not trying to make it more convoluted than it already is. I mean, honestly, if CSS loses its simplicity, then I think we're going in the wrong direction. I'm sorry, that's the way I feel about it. And I would like to see us to start moving in a direction where like either we acknowledge, and I hope that will be the case, we acknowledge that CSS has served the purpose it was intended to serve, and we start moving towards something better. Maybe there's no way to get around this. Maybe Grid is the best that we can do, but I just don't think it is. I just don't think so. This is exactly the problem I have with Angular. In the desire to try to solve some problems that have been around for a long time, they have solved that problem by creating a new set of problems, and the problems that have been created are, in my opinion, starting to rival the original problems, if that makes sense. I mean, I'm not saying that there's such a thing as a perfect solution. I'm not naive. I'm just saying that if like, as an Angular being an example here, if you need to create an entire ecosystem of a lot of complexity to solve the problem of a single page application or reusable JavaScript components, and like the problem that they're trying to solve has been and it's proven that it can be solved in a much more efficient manner. React is an example of that, and I think that Vue is also a better example, also a fairly good example of how you can solve the same type of problem. You don't need it, so that's why I say that Angular is a fairly poor solution to the problem. It's almost creating as many problems as it is solving, and that's what I feel about CSS Grid. It's simply it's a step in the direction why I think like Sass and Less and like what people do when they misuse that. I think that when you put like logic, like all the logic, like in most people, I mean the most skilled front-end people I've ever worked with, they don't use 90% of all, like they use variables and maybe a mix in here and there to just handle media queries. That's it. That's all they use Sass for. Everything else they complete, like the for loops and like all that other bullshit, they don't even touch. Not at all. Most of them don't even do nesting, like selector nestings and all that stuff, because it just doesn't provide any value. And that's kind of where I'm coming from here. I'm trying to say that you're making things more complicated than they have to be, and I think that CSS Grid is a step in the wrong direction. It's absolutely not. You should use it. I mean, I'm going to use it as well. I just don't like that we provide solutions to we try to shim in solutions into a platform, and we can. I think I'm not going too far out there when I'm saying that CSS Grid it's probably the most complex selector system or rule system that CSS has right now. I mean, there's so much stuff there to get a grid going, and to be fair, it is a complex problem to solve. I'm just saying that is that the way we want to go? Do we want to keep on going that route, really? Because I just don't like the idea of us finally ultimately getting into a situation where we have even more of this bullshit coming down the pipe. Like, because if something like CSS Grid can slip in there, why not what's the next thing going to be? Is it going to give it's going to be another magical rule system that is trying to basically because it's almost programming, it's almost logic at this point. And I don't think that's the way to go. We should aim towards going simple versus like doing this. And if we can't make things simpler, then maybe we should rethink the platform. And I know that sounds crazy, and I know how crazy it is, but I just get tired and a little bit sad when I see people mistake. This is not. I should probably pay my colleague for this. It's because it's his term. I get sad when I see people getting hyped up about change and not progress, because there is a difference between progress and change. And a lot of the stuff that, especially in the front-end community, I see is that people get psyched up about things that I just don't think are that valuable. And maybe that's just me, but I honestly think that we are growing a very JavaScript is the same. It's the same deal there. We are slowly but surely fucking up a tiny little beautiful language. It has its quirks. I'm not saying it's a great language overall. There are things that are genius, and there are things that are really crappy. But I think that over time we have too many people who put in these, like they shove more and more stuff down into the specifications, and things starts to grow, and finally we're going to be left with a big ball of mess that some smaller new and upcoming, like 10 years from now, there's going to be a smaller specification for another language or something like that coming down the pipe, and it's gonna take over, right? Because of the same, and I don't know if that's gonna happen. I just hate the idea that this endless cycle of, okay, something starts out simple, nice and easy, you can get really productive, and starts to grow and grow and grow because we have all these people who keep on shimming in a lot of like extra complex bullshit, and all of a sudden you have a big pile of mess that only a few select gurus can actually understand in its entirety, and then you start the whole cycle over with the next little framework or little small thing, and that's my fear. And CSS Grid is a step in that complex direction.